This is the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose, where I strategize with business owners on how to grow and scale their businesses to hit their income goals. This is episode 153 of the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose. Today, I'm talking to Madison Wetherill about how to develop the brand identity of a food blogger. So this is going to be the episode for you if you're struggling with the overall design and feel of your website, if you're not really sure on what that should look like, if you have it set up properly as a food blog, or even within other niches. This episode is going to help you so much. I want to also make sure that you hop over to the show notes whenever you get a chance to do it. I don't want you to do it in the middle of trying to drive. But I want you to hop over to the show notes to make sure that you get to the guide that Madison has put together for you. It is going to walk you through everything that we're talking about today, and it's going to have it right there in a PDF so that you're able to apply it. You know, I'm all about making sure that we make the strategies that we teach you accessible so that you can actually put them into practice. That's what we're doing here today. All right, so let's dive into this. All right, Madison, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
I am so excited to have you on and to really dive deep into this topic. But before we do that, I would love it if you would introduce yourself and your business to my audience. Just kind of really tell them all about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Madison Wetherill, and I run Grace and Vine Studios, which is a web design studio for food bloggers. So I focus on helping my clients connect more with their audience through strategic web design and brand strategy. And I also host the Vine podcast, which is a podcast where I dive into strategy and design tips for food bloggers.
I love it. Now, did you have a food blogger prior to taking this route?
Yes, I did. So basically, after I graduated college, I found that I had all of this free time and didn't know what to do with it. And so I started doing freelance design. I studied graphic design in college. And at the same time, blogging was kind of becoming a thing. This was back in 2012. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do both of these things, and kind of did them both together for basically until the beginning of this year. And just was at a place where I really felt like I needed to choose one or the other to focus on. I have 2 little boys, and I just felt so stretched thin. And at the same time, I really started to notice there wasn't a lot of support for food bloggers in terms of design and website strategy and all of that. And so I thought, I'm just going to see if I give all of my effort to this side of my business, what will happen? And it's been amazing. It's been a really good shift for me. And, you know, having my food blog and I have all of those connections, I'm still plugged into that world. So I'm kind of getting the best of both worlds now, which I love. But yes, I did have a food blog and still do. And it's still out there in the universe. So
yes. And I think what you did was smart. You walked into your zone of genius. You had that graphic design background. I think that the fact that you listened to that intuition inside yourself was so smart. And is the reason that your business is so successful now doing the branding for food bloggers. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an amazing transition, and I still get to be like hanging out with the people that I love and getting to talk food, which I love. So it's been great.
So one of the things that I always struggled with when I started my blog, and even still now, is graphic design. It is not a strength. It is not a zone of genius. It is like something I put off and hate doing. And I've had people reach out to me and be like, Jenny, I love everything that you talk about, but your graphics are gross. Oh, thank you so much. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about brand identity. Is a word that I feel like everybody's talking about right now, really trying to truly understand what that looks like. But more importantly, what would be your definition of a brand identity?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a word that I think, like you said, is used a ton. And it's kind of just one of those mysterious words that people talk about. And to me, brand identity really is a lot more complex than people make it. It really is something that combines like your niche, your ideal audience, your brand messaging, and then all of the visual elements of your blog, like your logo and your colors and your fonts. And I think a lot of the times people just think it's one of those things and not all of them, but really to have a holistic view of your brand identity and to really have a strong foundation, you really need all of those things.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that some of us will get the brand piece of it as far as like how we personally make ourselves unique and how that's going to come across. But then when it comes to design, it gets a little interesting. So what is important to know before you start creating your brand identity, do you feel?
Yeah, I think what I see most often with my web design clients is, like I said, that it's being oversimplified and people are coming to me and they need a logo, but they don't realize that in order to really have a strategic logo, that one that is actually going to do what you want it to do, you really have to have all of those other pieces. So you have to start with your ideal audience. And a lot of times people think that this is just like the demographics that you'll find on Google Analytics. And that's a piece of it, but sometimes we're not even attracting the right audience to our website. And so it's really about who you want to come to your website. Who is that ideal person that you can really help? Because you can look at your stats and say, well, I have 80% of women and blah, blah, blah. But if that's not the ideal person you want and the ideal person that you can help, then those stats don't really matter. So I think having your ideal audience in mind is huge. And that's kind of where I start when I'm working with a design client and we're kind of going through the strategy process is, figuring out what is that foundation going to be? And then figuring out, okay, what is this person struggling with and why am I the person that can help them? And then once you have that whole piece figured out, that's when you can really build like a holistic and just great foundation for your blog to grow on. And so I think that not only helps them to be able to figure out their branding and the visuals, but also just gives you so much more confidence to be able to share what your message is and who you're trying to help instead of just saying, oh, I'm just a food blogger or, oh, I just share X kind of recipe. So really having that foundation, there's just so many benefits to that. And I think it's a piece that's often missed in the food blogger community and just, the blogging community in general, because it just gets oversimplified.
Yes, I love that you talked about it. So you really stress the fact of your ideal audience and the problem that you solve. I think for a lot of us, when we started a blog, especially if you started, let's go 10 years ago, like this old dinosaur sitting here, but we started as just a way to kind of share what was going on with our lives, right? And I think as food bloggers, because that was where I kind of saw myself when I left the Melrose family, I primarily did food. And it often became about what we're not up towards the end, but in the middle, it was what was I making for dinner? Well, that was what I was shooting that day to go up on the blog later on in the week or whenever it might be. So it wasn't a matter of thinking about, okay, what does my ideal customer need or my audience? It was what's convenient for me and I'm going to put it up there and make it work. And hopefully I'm going to attract some people if I get a really pretty good shot of it and put it up on Pinterest. And then I'll get all that traffic coming from there, which then lends yourself to not knowing what that problem is that you solve.
Exactly. And I struggled with that with my food blog as well. And I feel like we all went through a period of time where we did that, where it was just, we just shared whatever made sense at the time. And for me, my food blog actually was for people who didn't have any confidence in cooking and were just starting. And so when I was sharing recipes that were comfortable for me, they were way too advanced for my audience. And so without having that ideal audience in mind, when I was creating my content, I started just attracting random people from Pinterest and Google, and nothing stuck because I think I was saying one thing, I was saying, oh, I'm here to share easy recipes to build confidence, but then I'm sharing this complex recipe. So there was just this disconnect between what I was actually sharing and what like the heart of my brand was. But I think, food bloggers, all of the bloggers, we're just so busy that it's hard to like keep that foundation in mind. And it's easier to sometimes just create the content that comes more naturally to you. But again, I think having that foundation, and I actually recommend to my clients just to have some of those key brand messaging pieces just written down somewhere for you to reference so that you can make sure, okay, I have this great idea for a recipe. Is it in alignment with my brand messaging and with who I'm trying to reach? Or is it just something I want to make for fun? And I think that's also a struggle, is like, you can make something for fun and it doesn't have to go on the blog. Like, that's okay. And it's hard to separate those things sometimes because our blogs are so personal.
Yes. Yes. And you said that story about like trying to make things quick and easy. That was mine as well. The Melrose Family was all about quick and easy recipes and projects for busy parents. And I can remember in particular when I was pregnant with my second daughter, creating this Easter cake, and it had some sort of fancy name that I don't even remember the name of it now. But it took me 8 hours to
complete. Oh my goodness.
8 hours. And I was pregnant, and I was like huge pregnant. And it just, clearly not only was it crazy for me to be doing, but it would not make sense for that ideal audience that you talk about. So I love that you say like, have it there for yourself as like your vision, just to remind yourself, like, this is what it needs to fall into this box of who I'm trying to reach for. So you can do the keyword research and try to find like a lasagna, but you need to make it specific so that it's not this intricate lasagna that you're making like the noodles from scratch. It needs to be something that's quick and easy, falls into that category of what your audience is looking for. I'm so glad that you gave that example.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to thinking about the content that you're sharing, but there's also so many strategic ways that you can utilize your website to actually convert people. And I think we forget, it's funny. I hear people always saying, I want more traffic. And I think that's like really a twofold thing. I think part of that is I want more Google and Pinterest traffic. But I think another part of that people forget is that you actually want to build a loyal audience, because if you don't, then kind of what's the point? You want people that are commenting on your recipes or replying to you on Instagram and saying, I loved this recipe. It was perfect for my family. But when you don't think about things strategically, like sometimes that just gets lost. And then you're just in this rat race of just trying to always, get more page views from Google and, overcome the algorithms and all of those things that we all say we hate, but we forget like what the other option is,
And it's so funny that you said about page views, because I just admitted today, I did a live this morning inside my influencer entrepreneur Facebook group and raised my hand on myself as I was talking about how I was a card carrying page view chaser for years, because that's something that happens and that's what you end up doing. So how can I love that we're talking about like really focusing in on what that audience needs to solve that problem. So we're talking food in particular, right? How does the brand identity of a food blog differ from that of other niches?
Such a good question. I think, again, this kind of goes back to oversimplifying things. I think we've all been told 100,000 times you need to pick a niche. And I think people get very simple. They are too simple when they choose the niche. So, and I know you've talked about this before, where people introduce themselves and they say, I'm a food blogger. It's like, okay, yeah. So, but instead it's figuring out, okay, what makes you unique as a food blogger? What types of recipes do you share? And I think there's like a third level in that. So in my branding questionnaire that I send my clients, the first level is like, okay, what's that top level niche? You're a food blogger. Great. What's that second level? Okay, I'm a food blogger who shares this type of recipes. So let's say dairy-free recipes. Okay, what's the third level? The third level is what makes you unique. If you lined up 10 different dairy-free food bloggers, what makes you all unique? And for you, it might be that, you use a certain type of ingredients, or, you believe that being dairy-free should be easy and you don't actually have to use weird ingredients. Like that part of who you are and your brand is what makes you unique. And so people so often just stick at that second level where it's like, this is the type of recipe I share. But as food blogging gets more and more saturated, there are just so many food bloggers out there now, really figuring out what makes you unique in your, what feels like a tiny niche is really going to set you apart. And I think that's what's going to convert, that audience from Google or Pinterest into people that stick around, because it's kind of your philosophy of the recipes that you share and why you do it. How did you get to be, unless you were born that way, at some point you started developing this cooking style. And I think, for food bloggers, sometimes we take the personal side out of it. I think there was this period of time where people were afraid that, they'd veer into the lifestyle category if, God forbid, they said something that wasn't food related. And it's like, there is a balance of, who you are and your personality, and also remembering like who your reader is and how you're serving them. So I think to answer your question, it's really just that food bloggers seem to have a simplified outlook on what their niche and what makes them unique is and forget to go a couple layers deep. And it's not something you have to share every single time you talk, but just knowing it will help you to shape the way you speak to your audience, I think.
Yes. And I think that's often it's your story, right? It's what kind of things have happened to you in your life to make you believe the things that you believe, whether it's dairy-free, whether it's vegan, whether it is Italian recipes. There's got to be a story behind that. And I think part of the reason that a lot of food bloggers have shied away from it is we saw the jump to recipe button, right? We are getting comments on social media, on our blogs saying, I don't want to hear about your kids. I don't want to know your story, blah, 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 blah. And I think it's not necessarily that they don't want the story. It's that they don't want a story that's not connected to what you're creating. So in other words, if you're going to tell me how you had to go to soccer and then you had to do the laundry and then you had to do this, tie it to that recipe. And if you don't tie it to the recipe, there's a problem. You can't just tell me a laundry list of things that you did that day. Tell me how it gave you that time then to be able to sit back and be able to make the lasagna with your daughter and to be able to really focus on that relationship that you have with them because it was quick and easy and something they could get involved in. It's tying it back to that overall story that I think we're missing oftentimes for bloggers that can't seem to figure out, or those that can't tell me who their audience is. That's my favorite question to ask. And I get all the time, well, they range from the age of 25 to 44. And they're reading their analytics to me.
Exactly. And that when you focus on those, again, that high level of who your audience is, it's like, okay, but so what? And it's interesting because I feel like so many, ideal avatar questionnaires and blog posts about that kind of stuff really focus on those things, but they forget, why does that matter? Does it matter if my audience is 20 or 40? If it doesn't matter, then, just pick a number. Like it doesn't, and I have I have a podcast episode all about like the fact that your blog is not about you. It's about your ideal audience. And it has to do, I talk about that where, does their occupation matter? And I think for most food bloggers, it really does. It matters whether they are working all day and coming home and they have to cook dinner in 30 minutes, or they're a stay-at-home mom and they're juggling kids and trying to make dinner, or whatever it is. Those things matter, but sometimes it really doesn't matter if they're 20 or 40. For other food blogs, it really does. So really looking at like those kinds of questions from the lens of, does this change how I'm going to approach my audience, how I'm going to speak to them, and how I'm going to choose what content I want to share. And if it doesn't, don't stress about it. Don't worry about it. But, like you said, definitely don't make that be your answer, because that probably doesn't matter. What matters more is, why are they dairy free? Why are they seeking healthy recipes? Like those struggles that they have are so much more important than any demographic information that you might be able to throw out.
Yes. And those things that you're talking about are what makes that person authentic and is going to give their audience the opportunity to truly connect with them and want to then purchase any products or services that they are going to offer, which of course, as many of you know that listen to my podcast, I'm always pushing my bloggers to continue to think about how can you serve your audience by providing them with a product or service that's going to make your business more fruitful, but also solve the problem for that audience that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to what you said about, the jump to recipe and people not caring about your story, maybe those aren't your people, and that's okay. Like, I had a food blog friend tell me years ago that you have two different audiences that you're serving. You have your Google audience who is coming to you. They're probably never going to come back to your blog again, and that's okay. And then you have your people. You have the people who are going to buy into your message and who are going to care about the next recipe that you share and the next, and who someday when you create a product, they're going to be first in line to buy it. But if you take all of your personality and all of the brand messaging out and you try to be this cookie cutter food blog like everybody else, you're never going to get that audience. And, it's hard when everybody is kind of trying to, fight the algorithms and do what Google wants and all of those things. But we have to remember that Google actually wants us to serve our users. And the more we can do that, the better. So yes, adding the story about soccer practice and dance practice and all of that stuff may not serve your user, but maybe, showing, okay, I have this complicated recipe, but I'm going to put a box in my post that shares how you can make this recipe easier, what store-bought items you can use to make this easier. That is going to serve your audience. And if someone sees that over your story that has nothing to do with the recipe, they're going to come back because you served them and you helped them overcome a struggle that they were having to get dinner on the table.
Love it. It's so, so true. All right. So tell me more on the graphic side of things. What elements are important to pay attention to when it comes to brand identity?
Whether you're a seasoned podcaster or just thinking of starting a podcast, you need to listen to Buzzcast from the folks at Buzzsprout. Here we go! Buzzcast covers everything a podcaster should know, from marketing strategies and how to make money from your podcast to the latest and greatest tech and industry insights to keep you on the cutting edge. Follow Buzzcast by clicking the link in the description or go to buzzcast.buzzsprout.com and keep podcasting.
Right. So like we kind of talked about at the beginning, I think, most people go to, when they think of brand identity, they go to the logo and the visuals. And so when you're talking about that, definitely your fonts and your colors are important. I think for food bloggers, especially, it's really important to kind of visually compare, maybe what your logo looks like or even your blog design to your photos. And do they match? There's some iconic food blogs out there who have very simplified photography. And if their website was cluttered with tons of graphics and colors and things like that, it just wouldn't fit. So remembering that, there's a lot of pieces to your brand identity and your logo is a huge part of it and it needs to work with everything else. It needs to work with your style of photography. It needs to work with your blog design and not be something that just doesn't seem like it fits. And I think, sometimes people will feel like they don't have the ability to really know that because they're not a designer. But I think innately, like if you really look at it and you think about it, there's something that feels off. And yeah, you might not know the solution of like, okay, it's this color that's clashing with this, but you can just trust your instinct to know whether or not it looks right. And if it doesn't, lean into that and kind of figure out why, compare it to another image of yours and see if that fits better. So maybe it's the image, and if that's like a one-off thing that you just tried a different photography style, like that's okay. But if every photo of yours has that same style, maybe your logo is too simple or too complex or whatever it is. But then like we've talked about, I really feel like the brand messaging piece is just a huge piece of, I know it's not design specifically, but knowing that brand messaging will help you with your design. Because again, like let's say that your audience is, overwhelmed, busy moms of toddlers who are looking to entertain. Your logo, your content, your blog design, all of that needs to reflect what they're needing. And if they're overwhelmed at home and they come to your website and it's like pop up and ad and all of these things in their face, that's going to be overwhelming to them. So, remembering that all of these elements go back to talking to your ideal audience and what is going to resonate with them. I find that like colors tend to be more, I don't want to say controversial, but more of an issue in other industries where you really have to think about color psychology and things like that of like, what is the psyche, receiving when they see a color. But for food blogs, it really is just about making sure that everything looks good together and making sure that your food photography is going to resonate with someone. There's a lot of food blogs out there that have really stylized approaches to food photography. A blog that might have simple, easy 30-minute recipes, like maybe that stylized approach doesn't work very well. Maybe they need something more simplified. So really thinking about who your ideal audience is, the messaging that you want to share with them, what their struggles are, all of those things will help you to kind of craft like the visual side of your blog, including your fonts and colors, including your style of photography and your blog design. So I think it's really important to start there and build from there.
I love that you brought up the fact of photography because I sold the Melrose family last spring and it recently got a redesign. The new owner did a redesign and I couldn't, when I looked at it, there was something just, obviously it's not mine anymore and there's always that, but right. It was the colors. She changed the color background and it was clashing. Like the color, I don't know if it's still like that and I'm not sure. It doesn't work with the photography because of the background that she chose. It just blends too much. Like something was off and it was that it's the photography with the color. So I find it so interesting that you brought that up because that's exactly what it was for me.
Yeah. And I think that really, that sort of conversation comes out when you're thinking about the strategy. And I have seen such a bad trend for such a long time in the design industry just to think about things that are pretty, and yes, your client, if I'm working with a client who doesn't have a design background, who's, like you and saying, I don't get design, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. they might not be able to tell me what's wrong with it, but I have to think about that as the designer. I have to know who your ideal audience is and where they're at mentally and what they're struggling with so that I can create something that's going to resonate with them. And so I think I'm seeing more of a shift now in the design industry, and especially with web design, towards, more strategic design. But I think there was a trend for a really long time to just do what was popular and what looked pretty. There was that trend for a long time of like the watercolor background behind everybody's logo. And, you really have to think strategically about it, because what's going to happen if you don't is you'll be back in 6 months for another logo because you don't like it, because it doesn't feel right, And so really thinking about the strategy behind everything that you do for your blog is just going to, first of all, it's going to help you to not waste time doing, or money if you're outsourcing that kind of stuff, with things that you're not going to like in 6 months. So again, remembering it doesn't really matter what I like. If my audience likes it, then that's what's important.
Absolutely. So now we've gone through and we've created this brand identity for ourselves, right? Where do you feel it's important to have that found?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, going back to the logo definitely, is front and center on your website, and everybody, understands that. I think that's kind of where people stop a lot of the time, and they forget that, again, that can influence pretty much everything else that you do for your blog. It could influence your, style of photography. It could influence the style of videos that you do. If you're doing videos for your blog, even if you're outsourcing that, a good videographer is going to know, what fonts to use or what colors to use in your video, or what style of video to shoot. I think it also can convert into Pinterest templates for your blog. It could convert into your media kit. Really, everything should feel cohesive. And that's something, when people try to DIY their design work in their blog, that's what ends up missing, is that cohesiveness where everything feels, like it matches together. And you end up having this entire suite of kind of design collateral for your brand that all fits the same aesthetic and it all connects the same way with your audience. So I think that's really important to remember, is just that everything should, if you put it all out on a table, if you printed all of it, like everything should feel the same. Not that it looks identical, but it just all feels like it goes together. And so that's really important. And then in terms of like your brand messaging, which isn't so much the visual side, that can really go across everything. Really, it's your blog posts, like we were talking about, like what is your story that you're sharing in that post and how is it relevant to this recipe? So, why did you choose the recipe? Why does it fit within that type of audience that you're trying to reach? Your social media, there's some influencers who do a great job of talking to their audience on Instagram stories in a way that just fits so perfectly into their messaging. Into your emails. If you're using email marketing, that's a perfect place. I think people so often just go to an RSS email or just like sending out their latest post without really thinking about like what's extra value that I can add to help this person. So, really the visual side can be across so many places, your blog and all of the different design collateral you might have, when you get to a point where you're creating a freebie, all of that kind of stuff. And then the brand messaging really is, everywhere as well. So that just, I hope, shows that these two things are so foundational to your brand. And once you have them and you like can reference them, and sometimes it's as simple as just writing it out. Like, what do I do? Who do I do it for? And why? And that why piece, I think, is the foundation that people are missing sometimes. And they might know it, but when they need to write it, they don't have the words for it, or they go so easily to something more generic that is the same as everybody else.
Right. Yes. And a lot of times that'll lend going back to your mission. And that's something that I've recently covered on the podcast, is really understanding why it is you're doing what you're doing. Like, what is the purpose that you're putting it out there for? Once you understand that, everything else can line up much easier, and you can actually prioritize what you should be working on and what you shouldn't, because we all know those rabbit holes can be very deep. So having a better idea of like, is this supporting my mission, is so very important. So
Absolutely.
Madison, you have put together a guide for us. We're going to link to that in the show notes that go right along with this, so that you guys don't have to go back and replay this 800 times trying to write down the notes for you. We're making sure that we link to the guide right in the show notes, that you have that. Where else, Madison, are the best places to reach out to you?
Absolutely. So I am, like I said, because I have a past with food blogging, I just love connecting with food bloggers. I love drooling over your recipes. So the best place to do that is probably Instagram. I'm over there on at Grace and Vine. And then I also have my podcast, the Vine Podcast. So if you're interested in more conversations like this about strategy and design, you can definitely check that out. And then my main website is graceandvinestudios.com, where I offer various levels of design support and all the way up to fully custom branding and website design.
Love it. Madison, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with my audience. I so appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was such a blast to talk, and I can't wait for them to listen to it.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, there you have it. I'm hoping that if you listen to this on 1.5 speed, that it wasn't too fast for you, because Madison and I started giggling as soon as we were done, because the two of us are both such fast talkers that we were able to continue the conversation and build off of everything that each other was saying. So if you are uncertain on your brand identity, I really want to make sure that I stress the fact that you hop over to the show notes and grab the guide that Madison has put together. It's going to walk you through it and give you so much valuable information that you can see it's not just about the aesthetic. It's also about making sure that your messaging is clear and concise. And if you have it right there next to you, it's going to make it that much easier when you are creating your content. I would love to see how you are listening to the podcast. Take a picture or a screenshot and tag me at Jenny_Melrose, and I will be sure to send you a message. I also appreciate it so much when you guys take a time to subscribe to the podcast so that you get all the latest episodes, but also when you leave a review. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of where all of the podcast episodes are, you're going to see the 5-star rating, and then it's going to ask you, write a review. If you take the time to write a review, I will absolutely make sure to get and send you a video message thanking you and just checking in to make sure that if there's any questions you have, I can help you move forward with them. So make sure you put your Instagram handle in your review so that I can make sure to send you that video. All right, guys, until next time, I will see you all then.